December 22nd, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. A German general's formal surrender demand is delivered to the American commander by a four-man party under a white flag, and the American general's response is a single word: nuts. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division and the garrison of Bastogne, does not elaborate. He does not explain the tactical situation from his perspective. He does not offer a counter-proposal or ask for time to consult his superiors. He looks at the German demand, which has been typed formally on paper, and which informs him that his garrison is surrounded, that further resistance is futile, and that he should surrender to prevent the unnecessary suffering of his men and the Belgian civilian population of the town. And he writes, one word: the German parliamentary officers who carry the response back to General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps that has Bastogne surrounded, require an explanation of what the word means. When the meaning is explained to von Luttwitz, that McAuliffe is telling him, in the specific idiom of the American army, to go to hell. The German general's reaction, recorded by his staff officers, is something between fury and genuine confusion. He has 45,000 men encircling a town held by approximately 18,000 Americans who have been there for 5 days with no ammunition resupply beyond what they carried with them, no medical resupply beyond what was in their aid stations when they arrived, almost no food beyond what has been scrounged from the Belgian civilian population that has chosen to shelter in Bastogne's cellars rather than flee into the German-held countryside, no winter clothing adequate for temperatures that have fallen to -15 degrees Celsius and that are forecast to fall further, and no prospect of relief within any time frame that von Luttwitz's operational planning could identify as relevant. His Corps intelligence officer has confirmed from prisoner interrogations and aerial observation that the nearest American armored relief force is 60 miles south and has not yet begun to move toward Bastogne. The German calculation is correct. The American calculation is different. The German calculation is correct. The American calculation is different. And the difference between those two calculations, the thing that von Luttwitz cannot bridge in his understanding of what the men inside Bastogne are actually made of, is what the next 4 days will demonstrate to the German army in terms it can record, but never fully explain. To understand why the defense of Bastogne is, at the operational level, something that German military doctrine would have rated as essentially impossible, you have to understand the town's position on December 18th, 1944, when the 101st Airborne first arrived. The Battle of the Bulge had begun 2 days earlier. Hitler's Operation Wacht am Rhein, 28 divisions striking the thinly held American line in the Ardennes, had achieved total tactical surprise across a 60-mile front, shattering the 4 divisions of the 8th Corps and opening a penetration that was driving west toward the Meuse River. The 106th Infantry Division had been destroyed almost entirely, 2 of its 3 regiments encircled and forced to surrender, the largest American mass surrender since Bastogne. The 28th Infantry Division was fighting a desperate delaying action that was costing it a regiment at a time. German spearheads were reaching towns that American soldiers had been using as rear areas, towns with supply dumps and headquarters facilities and the civilian infrastructure of an army that expected to be advancing into Germany, not defending Belgium. The town of Bastogne, sitting at the junction of 7 major roads in the Belgian Ardennes, was the key to the entire offensive's logistical sustainability. Without Bastogne, the German advance could not be adequately supplied through the Ardennes road network. Every German operational planner understood this. And on December 18th, when the advance elements of Kampfgruppe Piper were already far to the west, and the main German effort was focused on reaching the Meuse before American reserves could react, the question of who would reach Bastogne first, German forces moving to encircle it, or American forces rushing from reserve to defend it, was being answered in real time by the movement of formations across ice-covered Belgian roads in the dark. The 101st Airborne Division was not supposed to be in Bastogne. It was in Mourmelon-le-Grand, France, 107 miles southwest of the Ardennes, reconstituting after the Market Garden operation in September 1944, an operation that had cost it heavily and from which it had not yet fully rebuilt its personnel or replaced its equipment losses. The division's commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was in Washington. Its assistant division commander, Brigadier General Gerald Higgins, was in England at a conference. The officer who ended up commanding the 101st at Bastogne was Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, the division's artillery commander, who found himself in charge of a division that was being alerted for movement before its men had been fully informed of what had happened in the Ardennes, before adequate ammunition had been drawn, before winter clothing had been distributed, and before anyone could provide a clear picture of where exactly the German offensive was, or what specifically the 101st would be doing when it arrived at its destination. The men of the 101st loaded onto trucks on the night of December 18th and rode 107 miles through sleet and snow in open vehicles that had no overhead cover and no heating, the men sitting on the truck beds in whatever they were wearing when the alert came, many without overcoats, some without their full combat equipment, all of them moving toward a front that no one in their chain of command could fully describe, because the front itself was in the process of dissolving and reforming in ways that the American Army's command and communication systems in the Ardennes were not yet tracking accurately. The ride took hours. The men arrived in Bastogne on the morning of December 19th, cold, tired, and without a clear tactical brief, which McAuliffe resolved by going forward to the junction of the roads north and east of the town, the directions from which the German advance was most immediately threatening, and observing the situation directly from a position close enough to the front that the German artillery rounds that were already ranging on the road network around Bastogne were landing within a quarter mile of where he was standing. He came back with what he needed. The defensive perimeter began forming within hours of his return, built on ground that McAuliffe's eye for artillery terrain told him was the best available for the force he had, even if it was not ideal by the textbook standards of perimeter defense against a numerically superior attacker. McAuliffe was not a glamorous figure by the standards of Second World War American generalship. He was a competent, steady artilleryman who had made a career of professional reliability rather than personal brilliance. What he understood that the German assessment of his situation did not account for was that the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, veterans of Normandy and Holland, was not a normal formation by any standard that von Leutwitz's 47th Panzer Corps staff used to evaluate enemy strength. These men had been trained to operate without supply lines, without lateral communication, without the safety net of a continuous friendly line, because airborne operations had no safety net. They had practiced operating encircled. They had trained for exactly the situation that the German command believed would break them. The German forces that closed the encirclement of Bastogne by December 21st are substantial and experienced. The 47th Panzer Corps has the 26th Volksgrenadier Division under General Heinz Kokott holding the ring around the town from the north and east, with the 2nd Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr Division bypassing Bastogne to the west and northwest. Those divisions have the Meuse as their objective and cannot wait for the town to fall. The forces actually assigned to take Bastogne are predominantly infantry with limited armor support, attacking a perimeter that the 101st has established in a ring roughly 15 kilometers in diameter, with the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment under Colonel Robert Sink holding the eastern and southeastern sectors, the 502nd PER under Colonel Steve Chapuis holding the northwest, the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment under Colonel Joseph Harper holding the south and southwest, and the 501st PIR under Colonel Julian Ewell holding the northeast. Outside the perimeter, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion and elements of Combat Command B, 10th Armored Division have been incorporated into the defense, providing armor and anti-tank capability that supplements what the 101st brought with it. The total garrison strength is approximately 18,000 men. Against them, von Lüttwitz eventually concentrates approximately 45,000. The ratio is not the problem. The problem from the German perspective is the ground. Bastogne's defensive terrain is not particularly favorable to the defender. The town sits in a shallow basin, surrounded by higher ground on most sides, terrain that artillerymen describe as bowl-shaped, meaning that the defender fighting along the perimeter is frequently silhouetted against the sky from below, and that the attacker on the high ground has observation advantages that the defender inside the perimeter cannot neutralize. The Ardennes forest that begins at the perimeter's edge provides concealment for the German forces assembling for attacks, while providing no concealment for the defenders moving between positions. The roads into Bastogne, the 7 road junctions that make it strategically critical, are also the logical avenues for German attack, channeling the perimeter defense into obvious positions that German commanders can identify, attack, and attempt to saturate with a weight of fire that the garrison's limited ammunition supply cannot absorb indefinitely. The Germans know the ammunition situation. Their intelligence has confirmed that the 101st arrived under-equipped, that the air resupply that is the normal lifeline for an encircled force is being prevented by the weather, the same thick cloud cover and freezing fog that is grounding the Allied air forces across the entire Ardennes front, and that the medical situation inside the perimeter is deteriorating as wounds accumulate and surgical supplies run out. By December 22nd, the garrison's artillery is rationed to 10 rounds per gun per day. 10 rounds. A single German infantry assault can force the expenditure of a day's artillery allocation in less than an hour if the guns are used at the rate that American doctrine normally prescribes for supporting an infantry defense. The guns are not used at that rate. McAuliffe's artillery commander, McAuliffe himself, wearing 2 hats, knows exactly how many rounds there are and exactly how long they need to last. And every fire mission goes through a mental calculation before the guns speak. Is this target worth the rounds? Will it degrade an assault that is building? Or will it kill a vehicle on a road and leave the garrison with fewer rounds when an assault that matters is incoming? The calculation is the kind that artillery commanders in conventional defensive operations never have to make, because conventional defensive operations have supply lines. The 101st artillerymen are not making conventional decisions. They are making the decisions of men who know that each round fired is a round unavailable for the moment when German infantry is 20 meters from the perimeter wire, and the guns are the only thing standing between that infantry and the town. The restraint is comprehensive, and it is grinding. Observers watching German movement from their forward positions are calling in targets they cannot engage. German vehicles on roads within range of the guns are moving unhindered because the ammunition situation does not allow firing on vehicles unless those vehicles are clearly part of an assault movement. The observers report. The fire missions are evaluated, the guns are often silent, and the ammunition that is saved by that silence is the ammunition that is available on Christmas Eve when the 26th Volksgrenadier attacks, and the guns speak at the rate the situation requires. December 23rd, 1944 is the day that changes the battle. The weather breaks. The thick cloud cover that has grounded the Allied air forces for 7 days begins to clear in the early morning hours, and by midday, C-47 transport aircraft of the 9th Troop Carrier Command are appearing over Bastogne in streams, 241 aircraft dropping 144 tons of supplies into the drop zones that the 101st has marked with colored panels visible from the air. The air resupply mission is not perfect. The first passes over the drop zones are made under German anti-aircraft fire that is intense and accurate enough to down several aircraft and damage others. The C-47 pilots flying straight and level at altitudes that make them vulnerable specifically because straight and level flight at a consistent altitude is what accurate parachute delivery requires. Accepting the anti-aircraft fire as the cost of getting the loads where they need to go, some loads drift outside the perimeter and are recovered by German forces or are simply lost in the snow. Some medical supplies, blood plasma, surgical equipment that the garrison needs most critically are among the loads that drift. But the total tonnage that arrives inside the perimeter on December 23rd is enough to change the arithmetic. Ammunition arrives in sufficient quantity to end the 10 rounds per gun per day rationing for the immediate term. Food arrives in sufficient quantity to end the half ration schedule that the garrison has been on since December 21st. Medical supplies arrive in insufficient quantity to address the surgical backlog, but in sufficient quantity to extend the lives of wounded men who would otherwise have died of treatable conditions in the next 24 to 48 hours. The 241 aircraft of the 9th Troop Carrier Command that fly the mission on December 23rd lose 19 aircraft and have 35 more damaged. The men who fly them know the German anti-aircraft situation. They have been told what the garrison's ammunition situation is, and they know what the loads they are carrying represent to the men in the perimeter. They fly straight and level anyway. The German assessment had assumed that no air resupply was possible before December 25th at the earliest, based on available weather forecasts. The weather breaks ahead of the forecast. The supplies arrive, and von Lüttwitz, who has been managing the timing of his final assault on the assumption that he could wait for the garrison to exhaust itself, now finds that the exhaustion timeline has been reset. He has to attack before the resupply effect fully manifests, or accept that the window he believed was closing has been pushed further into the future by a combination of the garrison's discipline and the unexpected weather improvement. He attacks, and the attack is the moment that demonstrates most completely what the 101st Airborne is made of. December 24th, 1944. On Christmas Eve, the Luftwaffe bombs Bastogne, the town's civilian population, sheltering in cellars alongside wounded American soldiers, experiences an air attack that kills and wounds civilians and American medical personnel in the aid stations that have been established in the town's substantial stone buildings. The bombing destroys the surgical aid station at a critical moment. The 101st's medical resources are already strained past their normal limit by the casualties of the previous 6 days, and the loss of surgical capability on December 24th means that wounded men who might have been saved by surgery in the hours following their wounding are now waiting for care that cannot be provided inside the perimeter. McAuliffe's after-action account of December 24th does not dwell on this. The men managing the surgical situation at the aid stations dwell on it, and their accounts survive in the medical records of the operation. McAuliffe's operational focus is on the German ground assault that follows the bombing, a coordinated attack by the 26th Volksgrenadier Division against the sector held by the 327th Glider Infantry in the southwest, supported by Stug 3 assault guns and several Panzer IV tanks that have been brought forward specifically for this assault by General Kokot, who has assessed the 327th's positions as the weakest point on the perimeter and who is correct in that assessment. The assault guns punch through the perimeter line at a point near the village of Marvy, exploiting a gap between the 327th's foxholes that the darkness and the chaos of the simultaneous Luftwaffe bombing have created, and produce for approximately 3 hours on Christmas Eve, the closest thing to a genuine crisis that the Bastogne defense experiences. German infantry and armor penetrate to within 2 kilometers of the town center. The 327th positions in the penetration area are in danger of being cut off from the rest of the perimeter. McAuliffe commits his reserve, a task force built around the remaining tanks of the 10th Armored's Combat Command B, in a counterattack that restores the line by midnight on Christmas Eve, but consumes a portion of the tank strength that he cannot replace. When Christmas morning comes, the perimeter is intact. The German assault has been contained, but the margin by which it was contained is narrower than any accounting of the previous 6 days' defensive success would suggest, and von Lüttwitz's staff, reviewing the overnight situation reports, notes for the first time that the garrison has demonstrated a capacity for organized counterattack that the German assessment had not predicted for a formation this far into its supply crisis. December 26, 1944, at 16:50 hours, as the winter light is fading and the temperature drops toward the coldest night of the campaign, the leading Shermans of the 4th Armored Division's Combat Command Reserve, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanding, break through the German encirclement south of Bastogne and make contact with the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion's positions on the perimeter's southern edge. The corridor is narrow, perhaps 500 meters at its widest, and it is immediately subjected to German artillery fire from the flanks. But it is open. The first vehicles through the corridor are not ammunition trucks or food convoys. They are medical evacuation vehicles, carrying the most critically wounded of the 101st, 2,000 battle casualties, out to the field hospitals that have been unable to reach them for 8 days, the sight that greeting arriving American relief forces, a medical evacuation that has been waiting for 8 days, organized and patient and deadly quiet in a way that only men who have been managing their own suffering for a week can organize and sustain, is documented in multiple after-action accounts and personal memoirs as one of the defining images of the entire campaign. The wounded come out first. That is the priority that McAuliffe's command has maintained since the encirclement closed, and it is the priority that the opening of the corridor immediately serves. The German assessment of why Bastogne held, requested by O.B. West after the relief operation reopened the corridor and entered the operational planning record as a formal intelligence analysis conducted in January 1945, when the German command was attempting to understand what had gone wrong with the Ardennes offensive at the specific level where everything should have been going right, identifies the air resupply on December 23rd as the decisive factor, the weather change that reset the garrison's sustainability timeline and denied the 47th Panzer Corps the collapse window it had been managing toward. The analysis is thorough by German staff standards, and is wrong in its conclusion in the specific way that reveals most clearly what German military doctrine could not accommodate about the American formation it was studying. The air resupply on December 23rd was decisive in the narrow sense of the word. It changed the resource situation in a way that extended the defense beyond the point where it would otherwise have become untenable. But the analysis treats the air resupply as the cause of the defense's success, rather than as a factor that mattered because everything preceding it had not failed. An encircled force that receives resupply after 7 days without it does not automatically continue to function as an organized military unit. It functions only if the organizational integrity has been maintained through the 7 days. If the command structure has not fragmented under the pressure of supply deprivation, if the defensive perimeter has been held without the artillery resources that doctrine prescribes, if the wounded have been managed without the medical resources that doctrine requires, if the individual soldiers have continued to occupy their fighting positions and to engage attacking forces with the coherence of a defended perimeter, rather than the disorganization of a formation that has been pushed past its sustainable limit. The 101st maintained that organizational integrity for 7 days without resupply. The German analysis identifies the resupply as decisive. It does not explain the 7 days. This assessment is accurate as far as it goes. What it cannot fully accommodate is the prior question. Why was the garrison still capable of organized defense on December 23rd, after 7 days of combat with rationed artillery, dwindling medical resources, inadequate winter clothing, and no prospect of resupply visible in any forecast that von Lüttwitz's staff had access to? The air resupply mattered. It mattered because it arrived and because what arrived was enough to extend the defense. But it arrived into a defense that was still coherent, still capable of using what arrived, still organized from the perimeter to the town center in a way that a garrison whose command structure had fractured under the pressure of 7 days without supply would not have been. The air resupply rescued a defense. It did not create one from the ruins of a collapse. The defense had not collapsed, and why it had not collapsed is the question that the German formal assessment cannot answer, because the German framework for evaluating unit capability under supply deprivation does not contain an adequate explanation for what the 101st Airborne Division demonstrably did by the time the Bulge is contained and reduced by late January 1945, when American forces have restored the line to approximately its December 16th position at a cost of approximately 75,000 American casualties across the entire Ardennes campaign. The defense of Bastogne has entered the operational history of the war as the defining example of airborne unit resilience under encirclement. The 101st Airborne's casualties for the Bastogne operation total approximately 2,000 killed and wounded out of a garrison that began at 18,000 and was reinforced to somewhat higher strength as the battle progressed. The German forces committed to taking Bastogne, primarily the 26th Volksgrenadier Division and elements of Panzer Lehr, suffered casualties that Kokot's division history estimates at approximately 4,000 killed and wounded in the assault phase alone, not counting the losses taken in the subsequent fighting as the corridor was opened, and Patton's Third Army began expanding the relief corridor into a full front. The exchange ratio is unfavorable for the attackers by a significant margin, and it is unfavorable specifically because the garrison's discipline in fire control, in ammunition management, in the organized rotation of units between positions to prevent the exhaustion of any single sector before it could be reinforced, multiplied the defensive value of each round fired in ways that a force not trained for sustained encirclement would not have achieved. What von Lüttwitz could not understand, and what the German formal assessment of the Bastogne defense documents without being able to explain, is the specific relationship between the 101st Airborne's training and the performance it produced under conditions that exceeded any training scenario the division had conducted. The airborne training cycle of 1942 and 1943 had been built around the assumption that airborne forces would regularly find themselves isolated, without supply, in unfamiliar terrain, required to fight their way to an objective or hold one, without the support network that conventional ground forces depended upon. This training was not preparatory in the sense of being a simulation of conditions that might someday occur. It was preparatory in the sense of being a systematic construction of the institutional confidence, the specific, personal, unit-level certainty that encirclement was not a terminal condition but a temporary one that would allow a formation to function under precisely those conditions without the psychological disintegration that supply deprivation and encirclement normally produce in conventional military units. A conventional infantry division that finds itself surrounded without supply enters a state of organizational crisis because its entire operational model has assumed continuous supply and lateral communication with friendly units. The assumptions are built into everything from the rate of ammunition expenditure to the rotation of units between positions to the medical treatment protocols that require evacuation of seriously wounded men to rear area facilities. When those assumptions fail simultaneously, When there is no supply, no evacuation, no lateral communication, no prospect of relief that any messenger from headquarters can specify a date for, conventional unit's command structure is managing a situation for which its doctrine contains no adequate guidance, and the gap between the situation and the doctrine is filled by individual responses that, without institutional preparation, trend toward the disorganized and the self-preserving rather than the coherent and the mission-oriented. The 101st Airborne had trained specifically to manage that gap. Its officers and NCOs had been told and believed from the confirmation of Normandy and Holland that the gap was temporary and that continuing to perform the mission was the fastest path through it. That belief, distributed through every level of the garrison's command structure and present in every private holding a foxhole on the perimeter, was the organizational asset that the air resupply on December 23rd found intact when it arrived, and that it amplified rather than created. The 101st men had been told, in training and confirmed by Normandy and Holland, that the supplies not being there was the expected condition, that the question was never whether supplies were present, but whether the mission could be accomplished without them long enough for the situation to change. In Bastogne, the situation changed on December 23rd, but it changed into a garrison that was ready to use what arrived, because the garrison had maintained its organizational integrity through the 7 days before the supplies came, which was exactly what its training had been designed to produce. The German army of the Second World War produced soldiers of extraordinary tactical quality, commanded by officers whose operational sophistication was, in most cases, genuinely superior to the American officers they faced at equivalent levels of rank and experience. The Wehrmacht's tactical system was arguably the finest ground combat system produced by any army in the modern era, and it is possible to make that argument without flinching at the political context that produced and sustained it. What the German army could not do in North Africa, in Normandy, in the Ardennes, and in every other theater where it encountered American formations, was predict how those formations would perform under conditions that exceeded its model. The model said that a force encircled without supply, subjected to sustained artillery and ground attack, with inadequate winter equipment and deteriorating medical capability, would reach a threshold of organizational breakdown within a predictable period and would then be exploitable by a conventionally superior attacking force. The model was built from the study of every army that had ever been encircled under those conditions and had broken. It did not account for the possibility that an army, trained from its inception to expect those conditions and to function through them, would simply not break on the schedule the model predicted, would instead, rationing 10 artillery rounds per gun per day with such discipline that the rounds were still available on December 23rd, when they were most needed, would instead hold its perimeter intact on Christmas Eve when the 26th Volksgrenadier punched through to within 2 kilometers of the town center, would instead organize the medical evacuation before the ammunition resupply when the corridor finally opened, because the men commanding that garrison understood the priority without being told. Understanding the priority without being told is the specific quality that von Leutwitz's surrender demand failed to account for, and that McAuliffe's one-word response expressed more precisely than any military analysis that followed it. The word was nuts. It meant, we know exactly what our situation is. We have assessed it more accurately than you have. We are not leaving.